My first ever 3 horsepower router in the 90s was a DWE625. Now, this model has been around for quite some time. Its replacement, the DWE625, has only been around since I think early 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So about a year at the time I'm filming this. Now, there aren't a lot of written reviews on this one yet, and they're all pretty favorable, but I didn't see any video reviews or tutorials, so I decided to take the plunge and get you the answers you're looking for. This is a non-sponsored review, as always, so you're going to get my honest opinion. And by the time we're done, you're going to know the difference between the old one and the new one, what's new and what's still the same, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and a little bit about how to use it. And yes, I am going to measure things. Quick note on the model numbers. This one is a DWE625 and this is a DWE625. I believe that stands for DeWalt Electronic, meaning this one is going to have more advanced electronics than the older one, not surprising. This one already came equipped with soft start and electronic feedback control. The soft start means that when you flip the switch, it's not just going to go up to full speed immediately. It'll take a few seconds to ramp up, and that makes it safer and easier to hold. And the electronic feedback control means that when you set the speed to 9,000 RPMs, for example, and start making a cut into the wood, and there's some resistance on the bit, it's going to try to maintain that same 9,000 RPMs throughout the cut. Older routers, you would hear it ramping up and down a bit more as it tried to maintain that speed, but with a newer one, it should maintain that speed pretty consistently throughout the cut. We'll check that later. Another point is that you're going to see a type number on there as well. This is a DWE625 Type 3. This one is going through Type 1 through Type 4. So being a Type 3, that means this is probably at least 10 years old. That just means that they made some changes to the router, maybe improve some parts, change a few things that didn't necessarily justify a new model number. But if you're ordering parts, you want to make sure you select the right type number so that you get compatible parts. I also mention that because I'm doing a review of the Type 1. This is a Type 1 because it's a brand new model. But if you get a Type 2 or Type 3, there may be some changes that would affect the relevance of this review. I'm not going to do an update, most likely, but if anybody brings any changes to my attention, I'll make sure I put that down in the video description or the comments or somewhere where you can find it. Now let's take a look at what's new and what is pretty much the same between these two routers, starting at the base and working our way to the top. The base is pretty much identical. There are some very minor changes and it's a different part number, but pretty much the same base. So if you have a fence that fits that one, it would also fit this one. The turret is a little bit different in appearance, but same functionality, and that's just intended to let you go to repeatable depth stops when you're doing plunge routing. Kind of set your memory right there. And same thing on this, just they made the screws a little bit different. The guide bush in the center is the same part number for both of these routers, and this will hold the bushings that let you do template routing. No change there. The collet and nut is the same part number. They haven't changed that since at least the Type 2. The plunge depth, the actual distance that it will travel, is greater on the new one, but both of these will go down so that the collet is just about flush with the base of the router. So not a major change there. You just really, with this one, you can come up farther, which I don't know if there's any real benefit to that. Maybe if you have a really long router bit, it's going to keep that bit from being in contact with the wood when you start your cut, but otherwise that's just a little bit of extra travel right there that doesn't really change a whole lot. I would almost rather have the collet come out a little bit farther than the base for doing things like slab flattening, so you can get a little bit more distance closer to the wood, but otherwise not a big difference, but it's probably the farthest range of travel of any of the 3 horsepower routers. The height stop rod over here is the same on both of these. You're probably not going to use that much for handheld routing, but if you want to put this in a router table, then this could be used to adjust your bit height. And it used to come with a longer threaded rod with a knob on it. You could use that to adjust the height when you were in a router table. You just got to take off this top nut, take off that nut, and then you can remove the top from the base and pull out the springs so they're not fighting against you in the router table, and then adjust your depth that way. And there's a detent right here. You squeeze that, you can move that nut a little bit faster. But for handheld routing, again, you're not really going to use it that much. And then we got the depth stop bar on the other side. This is one of the big noticeable changes. This is so that you can kind of adjust the height over here. You set it down to a 0 position, put that back on 0, and then you can adjust this rod to a certain measurement on here, and that lets you determine your plunge depth. So different design over here, and we'll go over that more in a little bit. Let's see, the handles and switch. This is a very big noticeable difference. With the old one, this is the on-off switch right there. You push it up to turn it on, push it down to turn it off. And on this one, more like the Makita design, it's built into the handle, which I think is great. That's just, it's convenient and it's safe, because if you're doing something like slab flattening and you have a kickback and this thing gets away from you, you're gonna let go and the router is gonna turn off. Although you can also use that thumb switch there to lock it in place and then just squeeze it to turn it off again, but just a little bit safer. The handle position, the angle they're at is just right, because if I'm standing at a workbench, that's about the angle my hands are at. Although if I'm doing slab flattening and I'm holding this more on the side, then it becomes a little bit awkward. I think I would rather have this thing straight up and down at that point. It's too bad it's not adjustable. That would be kind of a neat feature, but for handheld routing, this is a great position, and the trigger I think is a really nice safety feature, and it's just more convenient that way, easier to use. Next we have the plunge lock mechanism. And this one, you plunge down and then you push this lock down to lock it. So down when you're pushing down, and then push it back up to go back up. So this frees it, and pushing down locks it. With this one, this is it's a completely new design. You got this little switch right here, and when you push that, whatever height you're at, it'll lock into that position. And that's pretty cool. I like that. So if you plunge down and you get to your final depth, you just squeeze that trigger and it's instantly locked. You don't have to do a lot of readjustment. Like with this one, you plunge down, you got to kind of move your hand to get in that position. So this is a lot faster. The only thing I don't really like about it is that when you finish your cut, you want to get that bit back out of the wood before it burns. And to do that, you have to push down again, and a little bit of resistance in that. So I think it kind of in some ways makes more sense to push down to hold it down and to push up to bring it back up. Whereas this one, you got free travel, but then you have to push down to bring it back up. And I think that's a little bit awkward, but overall I like the fact that you can just lock it when your final plunge depth. So that's kind of cool. Let's see, the speed control. This one goes from 1 to 5, and this one goes from 1 to 7. But you'll notice that the numbers are closer together on the new one. I don't think that anything has changed there. There's still, I think, 9,000 RPMs to 22,000 RPMs. They just put more numbers on this one, which all that does is give you a point of reference to start with, so you can look up on the chart how fast each one of these are, compare it to your wood type and your router bit, and pick your speed in advance. I don't usually pay much attention to the numbers. I just go by sound and feel, but it's there, it's an option. No real change to the functionality. They just added more numbers on that one. And the last thing is, seems like a small thing, but the cord flex. Notice this one is a little bit stiffer than that one. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you go to change your router bit, that cord gets in the way. Whereas this one, when you're changing your router bit, it'll sit flat on the table. You don't have to worry about it tipping over. So small change, I think, makes it a little bit safer and easier to work with. And I think that is all of the basics for this one. So let's get into some more details. I almost forgot an important new feature that you can't see from the top, and that is that it has 2 LED lights, which will put pretty even lighting on your workpiece. Let's compare noise levels. We all know that routers tend to whine louder than Twitter employees, but we'll put an actual number on it and do a side-by-side so you can hear the difference. I double-checked the speed ranges for these, and there is a slight difference between the two. This one goes from 8,000 to 20,000 RPMs, and this one claims 9,000 to 22,000. Not a huge difference, but there is a little bit in there, so I'll try to find some points in the middle where they're running at the same speed, so it's an apples-to-apples comparison. I already did the measurements off camera, but that's the same camera I'm using to film right now on my cell phone, so I can't do it at the same time, but I'll throw the numbers up on the screen so you can see, and you can also just listen to the sound. Let's start this one out at speed 1, 8,000 RPMs. 9,000. This one takes a lot longer to stop, and it might just be because the bearings are newer and these ones are a little bit more worn out, not sure, but you can also hear when this one starts, it ramps up and then levels out to what's probably close to 9,000 RPMs. I don't have the tools to measure it, maybe I'll get that later. Next we will go up to speed 4, which is 18,000 RPMs, and speed 5, which is 18,000 RPMs. And here we go, speed 4. And then let's see, speed 5 is going to be 20,000 RPMs, and that will be speed 6 at 20,000 RPMs over here. And lastly, speed 7, 22,000 RPMs. So newer motor in this one, a little bit higher speed range, but for the most part, it's about the same decibel level for each one. I used a dial indicator and a steel dowel pin to get a rough idea of how much runout I had in the collet of several of my routers. I wanted to compare against the new one. I just chucked the dowel pin into the shaft and then clamped on the dial indicator and used that to measure as I was rotating the shaft. It's not a perfect way of doing it, but it got me a pretty good idea. Now, a lot of people don't really think about router collet runout, but it is kind of important, especially if you're doing extreme precision work or if you're one of those lunatics that clamps a router bit extension into your router. This is for if you're doing like slab flattening or something like that, and you just need that little bit of extra reach so you don't have to adjust your jig. That's one way to do it. I cannot recommend doing it that way. If you have too much runout, it's really going to be noticeable the longer your router bit is. For example, now, I have never actually used that extension, and I probably never will unless I can find a router with zero runout. But just for comparison, let's take a look at several of my routers and how they fared against the new one. And the winner is the 25-year-old Porter cable. The next feature we're going to look at is the depth stop bar. And that existed on the old model as well, but they re-engineered it for the new one. And I mentioned in the beginning, there may be some things about this router that I don't like, and this is it. The whole depth stop bar thing on the new router. When DeWalt found out that Triton made a router that had a cupped base that rocked on the table, somebody at DeWalt said, "Hold my beer, I'm going to re-engineer a depth stop system." This thing is an absolute disaster. I'm going to talk about how it's supposed to work, but I'm also going to show how it actually does work, or doesn't work, I guess is more accurately stated. So, the way that it's supposed to work is that if I want to, for example, make a 1/4 of an inch groove, 1/4 of an inch deep groove down a piece of wood, I got my bit in there already. I'm going to loosen up my plunge and drop the bit down until it just kisses the work surface, and lock it. I don't want to go down too hard because I might dent the board or scratch up my project board. But now I know that my bit is at a 0 depth of cut. The next step is going to be to come over here to this fine adjustment knob and make sure that the 0 lines up with that line right there. Which line probably should be in the front where you're looking at it, but they put it on the side, at least on mine. So I'll make sure that the 0 lines up right there. Now if you're having some trouble turning this thing, I was having that trouble as well when I first got this, and it's got a hex socket in the top. Looks like you can put an Allen wrench or something in there, but it doesn't come with an Allen wrench. It's also got the knurled knob, which indicates that you should be able to turn it by hand. But mine was just extremely stiff. I couldn't get it to move. Finally, I just unscrewed the whole thing, took it apart, and I found a broken O-ring inside of there, which was probably the problem. So now it's missing that O-ring, as that disappeared somewhere on the floor. And this thing might be prone to vibration when the router is running. But anyway, you would turn that to 0. Line it up with that line. And then you loosen up this knob right here, and that allows the bar to move up and down. So you turn the yellow part until it gets down and touches that screw, and then you tighten this knob. Oh, but that picked it back up again. So loosen it up again, turn it down, hold the yellow part with one hand, and then turn this with the other hand. All right, right there. So now you know that the bit is at a 0 depth. The fine adjustment knob is at 0. This thing is at 0, and now you just got to get a 0 to line up with that unnecessarily fat black line right there. If your 0 is just below the line, it may be tempting to go clockwise. Oh, but I just moved it again. I guess I had to tighten that thing a little bit more. Let me move that back down. Tighten this even more. I wonder if the old one moves when you tighten it. Let's see, I'll give this a light tightening and then try to turn that, and oh no, nope, that does not move. It moves when I loosen that, but if I tighten that slightly, it's not going anywhere. All right, but this thing right here, I'm going to tighten it even more. I moved it again, and let's see, how about that? I can still turn it. All right, let's try this again, being more careful, understanding that limitation of the system. Back down to 0, tighten this knob. And now I'm going to turn this thing down so that I don't accidentally pick this up again. And obviously, this thing is not the right size for my hands. And if you have arthritic hands, this is going to be nearly impossible for you. I'm going to turn that to 0, so now I know that my bit is at 0. My fine height adjustment knob is at 0, and my height adjustment knob right there is at 0. Make sure that's right on. Okay, so the next step would be to loosen this up again, and going back to the beginning, I want to make a 1/4 of an inch deep groove down a piece of wood. I'm going to turn that to 1/4. Get down there to see it, make sure it's centered, and again, hold the yellow part and turn that knob. So now I've created a 1/4 of an inch space right there, so I know that when I finally go to do my groove, I loosen this up and plunge down and lock it. And you can see that that is way more than a 1/4 of an inch, because what do you think happened when I dropped this thing down? It bumped this back up. So let's try this again. I'm going to go back to 0. I'm going to put that down on 0. And then I am going to, let's see, nope, I'm going to loosen that up and turn it 1/4 of an inch. And now, if I go very carefully, which is not always the easiest thing to do when you're plunging down into a piece of wood, but if I go very carefully, now I know that this is the same distance that I left right there. Now, another way that you can use this is if you're doing an inlay, for example, putting a bow tie patch into a piece of wood, you can start out the same way and drop the bit down until you get to contact the work surface just barely, and then loosen up the knob. And now you don't really need to worry too much about the numbers on there. You still want to have that on 0. It's optional to put that on 0. And then you adjust this so that the piece of wood that you're trying to inlay is right in between those contacts. And then tighten this up. And now you know that when this thing moves down, it's going to move the exact distance of the exact thickness of that piece of wood. As long as you don't go too hard and bump this up again, then you ruin your project. Now, if you want to leave this just a little bit proud of the surface, that's when you come over to your fine adjustment knob and you turn that clockwise to move that screw down a little bit. That would be 1/128th of an inch. It says 1/32nd. That is not correct, because if you go counterclockwise, you see that you're going in increments of 1/128th, 64th, and so on, and then you get to 1/32nd. So when you're going clockwise, it's misleading. It says 1/32nd, but you're actually turning an increment of 1/128th. And that would leave your bow tie patch just barely proud of the surface. So good for precision stuff like that, again, as long as that rod doesn't move. But wait, it gets even better. I had calipers on the table for a reason. I'm at 0 right now. So if I move up to 1/4 of an inch and lock it, what do you think that distance right there should measure? I'm going to go with 1/4 of an inch, or 0.25. .18. Not even close. All right, so that's less than 1/4 of an inch. Let's try again with 3/8. That should be 0.375. .3865. That's not far off. I'll give you that one. Let's try another one. 1/2 of an inch. That's easy. It should be 0.5. .58. That's too much. No, I'll put the rest of the numbers up on the screen. The point is that some of them are too high, some of them are too low, and some of them are pretty close. So, DeWalt released a new router, upgraded from the old one, supposedly, with a re-engineered precision depth system that is an absolute train wreck from engineering to quality control. Don't know how it happened, and it's hard for me to say that because I have a lot of DeWalt tools in my shop. Big fan, but this thing is a disaster. So if I had to choose, I'm sticking with Big Brother. What was supposed to be a cool feature overview and tutorial video last weekend has turned into a 2-weekend long disappointment, and I am not going any farther with the testing. There's no point. I spent last weekend reviewing the instruction manual, looking at the parts diagram, comparing features between the two, taking measurements. I even went so far as to drill out an aluminum router plate to put this in my router table to test power draw and compare the electronic feedback control. That's not going to happen this time. Now, I noticed that the measurements were off last weekend, and I was just going to say that you could put a gauge in there, some spacer blocks to get your measurements just right, or just check it manually each time if you like the router. But when I started filming this weekend, I noticed that unacceptable movement in the depth stop bar. Doesn't happen over here. This thing's a freaking tank. You could pound nails into masonry with that thing. So just imagine that you're flattening some rounds or some slabs, and this thing drops down 1/4 of an inch farther than you were expecting. All right, that's potentially disastrous. You could have a big kickback or just ruin your project. I mean, you can't put that wood back. Let's say you're doing some finer work like routing out a tray, and it drops down 1/16 of an inch too far. It's going to ruin your project. You can't sand that out. You're just going to have to keep cutting lower. So it's dangerous, and all I can say is don't buy that router, don't buy this router until they fix the issues, and I hope they do. I have made DeWalt aware of the problem. Actually, the depth stop bar they don't know about yet. I told them about the measurements being off, and I'm still waiting for a resolution on that. It's not easy getting to the right person. I'm not going to get into detail on my customer service experience so far. Hasn't been stellar, but hopefully we're going to get this to the right people and they can fix it in the next build. So again, this is the Type 1, and I don't know if the next one is going to be Type 2. I mean, this whole system is wrong, I think, because the pressure is in the front of that wheel, so it makes it want to turn. I think it's a bad design. And it's a plastic gear on the inside too. A plastic gear. No, that's a bad idea. So maybe the Type 2 is going to be better, and maybe they fix this one. I don't know. But the point is, if any DeWalt lawyers come after me saying that's no longer an issue, okay. But I'm talking about Type 1. I'm talking about this router. So it is an issue at the time I'm making this video, and this is going to stay up. Because I just can't believe that in the past 6 months, I have had to do 2 negative router reviews for 3 horsepower flagship routers. Triton messed up their TRA002 and DeWalt messed up the DWE625. All right, these are the flagship 3 horsepower routers. You had an opportunity. People were excited about it and you failed. Newer is not always better. Here's my Black & Decker industrial grinder that's probably as old as I am, if not older. Black & Decker industrial. All right, they don't make that anymore. So hopefully this is not a turn in the wrong direction. And in case you're wondering, I know the Triton went from being made in Taiwan to being made in China. These are both made in Italy. Wasn't expecting that, as their other routers aren't made in Italy, but for some reason the 3 horsepower ones are. So that brings us to a sad conclusion to this video, but I hope it helped you avoid making a costly mistake. And if you already have this router, well, this has only been out for a year, so you are still within the warranty period. Let DeWalt know, take it back, make sure that you get it fixed or get a refund. We'll see what's next. Anyway, thanks for watching, and see you next time.